The science of the Kabbalah makes doubt impossible in the matters of religion, for it and it alone reconciles reason and faith by showing that universal dogma, variously formulated but at heart always and everywhere the same, is the purest expression of the aspirations of the human mind enlightened by a necessary faith. Eliphas Levi. Hello, this is All Things Esoteric, episode 21. I'm here with Kate, and
Hello, good evening.
today we're going to talk about the Kabbalah. Exactly what the Kabbalah is, its history and origins, and its connection to tarot. And as always, Kate is here to talk about the sky.
All right, well, thank you. I've been looking forward to this episode. I can't even begin to tell you for quite some time. It's been one of the most enlightening research projects, if you want to put it at that, because that's kind of what we do is research and then try to bring stuff back out to you that I've ever been upon that just I was shocked and surprised at times, and my eyes were open to yet another layer of human consciousness that existed that I was never taught. It wasn't important when I was growing up, and it just wasn't table conversation to speak of such things. And we go into why that is a bit and why it was so obscure for so long and how now it's making its way to mainstream. So looking forward to that. I just want to give you an outline this evening of kind of where we're headed before I get into the sky map so you can kind of see what we want to do. So we'll take a look at the sky, and then we're going to go into the history and background of the text, Jewish mystical Kabbalah. And we're then going to probably have to do a part 2 on this. We'll see where we're at. But we will go into the tree of life and the 10 areas of the tree of life and bring the tarot cards in that apply to each of those energy centers on the tree. So with that, happy spring equinox over there, Anthony. How you doing with that? You having a good spring equinox? It's really the true start of a new year, not January 1st. That's a whole nother story. But and what did you say? Meh?
Meh.
Is that what you said?
Yep.
Let's see. We also have the new moon in Aries that I'm going to go over quickly that occurred this afternoon, actually. I come out of Eastern Standard Time from the United States of America, New York, New York. So what I want to talk about first is the bigger sky and what's going on there tonight as we open up this podcast. So I know we've been talking for a long time about Pluto. If you go back and listen to our other podcasts that we do, we always open with kind of a sky update, and I've been talking about Pluto a long time. Well, the moment has come, the long-awaited moment, when we're going to see Pluto go into Aquarius. It has been there since in Capricorn since 2008. And of course, will finally make its full entrance out in 2024. What happens here is Pluto will go into Aquarius, then it will go into what's called retrograde, and then it will go forward again, and then it will finally, as of January 2024, be full-fledged in Aquarius. So it's interesting, we're starting a new year with Pluto. Well, we go by the year because we live on Earth, and that's how we view the calendar. But it really is March. But it's the start of a new year collectively. And also, Pluto will be going into Aquarius, finally nestling down in there. It's going to take some time, but we'll see Pluto and Aquarius there for 20 years. And you're like, who cares? Why is that a big deal? Well, it's a big deal because if we look at in the past how Pluto has impacted our world through its transits through the signs and what they symbolically represent and mean, we can see patterns and we can see shifts of consciousness among generations of people, depending on how long Pluto's in there. And incidentally, Pluto doesn't stay in its orbit in each sign the same amount of time because its orbit is not regular around the zodiac belt. So you can look at that look that up further, excuse me, but there's some years I think it's Cancer where Pluto's in there 20 something odd years, and then other years it's shorter. So what's happening tonight with Pluto and Capricorn at 29 degrees 58 minutes? I want to talk about that degree. And if you've never heard anybody talk about critical degrees, it's certainly something to look into if you like astrology and those kind of things. But the wheel is 360 degrees, of course, with 12 houses at 30 degrees apiece. And certain degrees are stronger than others. And these are what we call the critical degrees. The 00 degree and the 29 degree is universal to all signs and is considered critical degrees. And then each type of modality of the signs have their own critical degrees. I'll explain. When they show up, also in the angled or cardinal houses, I want to say this, those houses bear a lot of weight when you have a 00 degrees in a cardinal house, which would be the first house for the ascendant, ruled by cardinal fire Aries. The fourth house, the IC, or the most sensitive, it's the darkest, most hidden portion of the chart, which is ruled by cardinal waters Cancer. The seventh house, or the descendant, which is the opposite, of course, of the first. It's our expressive energies to others. When we finally come out of the bottom of the wheel and make our way out into society, it's our outward connections, our bigger partnerships, often our marriage, who we're going to marry, things like this, or partner with, our style that we go out to and express ourselves with in the greater world, and our friends, but also our enemies. So it's an important house. And then finally, the 10th house, which is considered the MC or midheaven, and this is the zenith of the chart where we're most visible. And of course, this is the noonday sun, and it's ruled by cardinal earth Capricorn. So we've got dynamic shifting taking place in energies when we see planets at 00 or 29 degrees, and depending on, of course, the sign and its modality, it's going to express itself differently. But once a sign hits the 00 degree, it's settling into a newer expression. But at 29, it's quite erratic. So we've been sitting here for a while at 29 degrees. We're at 58 minutes as of 5:55 p.m., March 21st, 2023, Eastern Standard Time. New York, New York. So we're sitting there waiting to go into Aquarius, which will occur. What are my dates on that here? So on March 23rd at 8:08 and 53 seconds a.m., Pluto goes into Aquarius. So this is tomorrow morning. So the timing of this podcast on the Kabbalah is quite interesting to me, Anthony, as we get into this and start talking. The astrological energy behind us delivering this message now at this time is quite synchronistic. It's important, especially when you put, and I'm not going to go into it, but when we put our podcast chart up against the Skymap, all of the energy points to the first house. And it's profound to see the powerful energies working together, and how this is a message that, or a podcast, so to speak, that bears a little bit more weight than the others. There's something here with the mystical Kabbalah that's worth sitting with and looking at the right time. You're called to do that, because you should just jump into it, and there's a reason for that too. But on May 2nd, 2023, at 1:32 a.m., Pluto goes retrograde. So we're going to taste this crazy energy, you guys, of going into a new costume. It's like Pluto goes off stage as the actor and he switches his costume up and it looks completely different than what he's been wearing, or she, depending on the culture where people define Pluto, where this androgynous planet, right, is shifting gears and changing into Aquarius. So, in order to understand that, I think it's important to understand briefly what was Pluto doing in Aquarius. What are we finishing up? And hey, wherever Pluto sits in your chart, I would say in Pluto or Capricorn sits in your chart from, I would say, 26 degrees to 29 degrees is important to look at. Also, opposite sign there is Cancer. Wherever your Cancer is also being highlighted because we always have the polar axis going on, and the opposite is just as important as where we're focusing on. We can't forget we have duality. We have the other side to things we must look at. If there's anything we talk about here, I think we talk a lot about duality and a lot of balance in the black and the white, or the good and the bad, and how that's everything behind that. That's all I'm going to say about that. Otherwise, we'll go down the wrong rabbit hole. But I do want to read from about Pluto from Alice Deville. And if you don't know who she is, get this right here. She does a yearly sun sign book of horoscopes for everyone. It's pretty cool. And it's Llewellyn's 2023 sun sign book, Horoscopes for Everyone, Love, Money, Success, Alice Deville. I do not own this information. And here's what she has to say about Pluto. Picture all the gods and goddesses in the heavens above, living happily in a huge mansion in the clouds. Then imagine that Pluto's palace is at the bottom of the cellar stairs. And on the cellar door, which is in the kitchen, of course, a sign reads, "Keep out." Working on Darwin Awards. That's where Pluto would live. And that's the attitude he'd have. He's in charge of the unseen cycles, life, death, and rebirth. Obviously, he's not an emotional kind of guy. Whatever Pluto initiates really has to happen. He's dark, deep, and mysterious and inevitable. So, yes, Darth Vader does come to mind, if for no other reason than because of James Earl Jones' amazing, compelling voice. Still, this intense, penetrating, and oh so thorough energy has a lot more to offer. Pluto's in charge of all those categories we humans aren't fond of, like death, taxes. I added taxes and decay, for example. But on the less drastic side, he also inspires recycling, repurposing, and reusing. In your chart, Pluto represents a place where you'll be ready to go big or go home, where investing all or nothing is a given. When a crisis comes up, when you need to be totally committed and totally authentic to who you really are to get through, that's when you'll meet your Pluto. Power struggles and mind games, however well, you can also expect those pesky types of things wherever Pluto is located. So I just like the way that she brought in the cycles of Pluto and how, things die, yes, but we also get something new after it dies, right?
It's necessary.
Yeah. The 13 card is necessary. Pluto's cycle is characterized by awareness and acceptance of reality, where we're going to experience loss, illness, emotional suffering, dramatic shifts in society. So Pluto in Capricorn from 2008 to 2024. This is from Astral Transits, the Beginning Guide to Using Planetary Cycles to Plan and Predict Your Day, Week, Year, or Destiny. April Elliot Kent. Cannot recommend this book enough. It's excellent. But she says this: I'm writing this book 6 years into Pluto's transit of Capricorn, a sign of government and big business. And the story of this transit is still being written. So far, it has been characterized by a devastating financial collapse. How many of those have we seen since 2008? More than one, I can tell you. Maybe a couple big ones that they report, these skirmishes that break out. But no, there's things collapsing. I can assure you. Go on and look at the real financial news, and get off of the mainstream, if you will, and get to more alternative where they're not afraid to speak up a little bit about our financial system. Capricorn is the 10th house. And of course, this is cardinal earth energy. This is the zenith. This is the top of the chart where we spend a great deal of our lives and our time, so to speak, getting to. So by this time, we're 21 years old. More than likely, people are going to see us and we're going to be very visible. So it also stands for big government. It stands for leaders. You'll often see a sun sign here in the 10th house of world leaders or a strong aspect to that house. Oftentimes, you'll see the star Regulus there for those that are meant to have some kind of fame there in the 10th house. It shows itself. So, a financial collapse, exposure of government secrecy and spying, a U.S. Supreme Court decision that granted corporations the right of unlimited political campaign contributions, and a widespread distrust of government and corporations. Okay, so how much have we seen of that since 2008?
Right.
We're
The
seeing, yeah,
absolute Capricorn nature, which politicians and the government have revealed to us. Like before 2008, I mean, and the farther back you go, it was like the heart of the 1950s. There was at least the illusion that politicians and government were trying to do good things for people. But now, today, most people know that all politicians only care about themselves and you can't trust them about anything they say, that they're slimy people. There's not been 1 ounce of genuine compassion or anything like that in the actions of politicians and just the general political theater, right? There used to be so much more decorum and respectability, and again, at least the illusion of benevolence. But
yes,
a big
yes,
Capricorn theme is tooth and claw. None of that decorum, benevolent shit matters. Only the physical
right.
matters. Only the money matters. Only the power matters.
That's really, really true. And that's exactly what we've seen. Um, this also represents the father. So we have authority here with personal to yourself. It's opposite the fourth house of home. And we also have authority with government here. So with it being in Capricorn in the 10th house, there would have been huge shifts taking place within a society. And, the Edward Snowden showed up here and the Alex Jones showed up here and the internet took off with conspiracy theories and people now researching and not afraid to put it out there and to say, look, I don't want to be anybody's voice. I really don't. But I'm asking you to take a look at this and come up with your own opinion after you've seen the evidence. And of course, 9/11 was greatly, greatly questioned. This we've seen incredible documentaries taking place during that time that challenged the government. And so what consequently we are seeing is a huge shift from, I think, an I-centered, like you were saying, more I-centered government to we the people, which is what, ironically, the United States of America was built upon with its Constitution And the United States of America, if you listen to the podcast I talk about, had its return of Pluto. And Pluto takes a long time to go around the chart. So with it now shifting into Aquarius, well, I tell you what, we're going to taste it for just a few months and then it's going to come back. So here's my call, and I have not looked at anything else, but I'm specifically just going on this 29-degree turning into 00 relatively soon. I'm saying from then until May, and then May until when it starts going forward again. It's going to go retrograde, then it'll start going forward again. We're just going to see more and more financial challenge, especially within the United States of America. Now, we have to talk about that. And I don't want to make the podcast about this, but we are still the reserve currency for the world. The US dollar is still the reserve currency. If you know what that means, just look into it. The dollar is, no, go ahead.
Well, you were probably just about to get into it. I don't want to cut you off.
No, go ahead. Please. No,
Well,
come on
were
in.
you about to talk about the petro yuan that's coming?
No, I wasn't, but go ahead.
Well, right now you just mentioned United States dollar being the world reserve currency, and that is because Saudi Arabia has agreed to only do oil sales in United States dollars. Right now, China is negotiating a peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and there are fears that this may lead to a petro yuan.
Yes. Not to mention, that's going on, right? Not to mention the financial disasters that our banking systems are in and at currently. Don't let it fool you. I think anybody who knows anybody now, if you're well versed, you kind of know what's up. But quantitative easing and fractional reserve banking have utterly destroyed our economy, and that's the printing of money and flooding, thinking that that's the answer by the oh, I just can't even get started there. Otherwise, we might just get kicked off of here. So, you never know what you can say these days from YouTube. They're coming down on people more and more.
Well, we should expect to get thrown off YouTube whenever we reach a certain amount of viewers with the things we say, but we should be fine on the audio only platforms.
Fractional reserve banking is where they can lend out more in assets than they currently own, up to 90% more. So the banks write loans, but they don't have the actual cash on hand. Did you know that?
Yeah, and it's about to get even worse with CBDCs. But I think the illusion goes even one step further, because I think the value of gold is an illusion.
Yeah, it's kind of all an illusion. It's the price that we put on it.
Right.
Except silver and gold are what are called precious metals, and there's a limited supply of them. That's why there's a value placed upon them, and that's a whole nother story there.
Well, right.
Now, what was his name who does some really good work?
Most of its value, though, most of its value lies in the fact that someone will trade you something for it, right? You can't do anything with it, and so in that way, it's exactly like paper money.
Well, it's if you own it, you physically own it, okay? And I know that the argument is, well, you can't eat your gold if there's a war, you need bread. I understand that. But if you physically own it, it is on this planet the oldest form of currency, silver and gold, the oldest form of currency to have existed. And there is a limited amount of it. So it's a whole different ballgame when you're looking at silver and gold than when you're looking at paper. Paper can be manipulated, which it is. You can just produce more of it. anytime you want with no collateral, nothing backing up its value. So we're going to see all of that revised. And I don't really think it's going to be a storm the castle revolution kind of thing like some people predict over the next 20 years. I think what we're going to see is trying to adjust to Aquarius energy, which is definitely different than Capricorn energy.
Well, we have just signed on to the Global Pandemic Treaty. So the next time a so-called pandemic breaks out, we are by law legally required to do whatever the World Economic Forum says we should. No, not the World Economic Forum, World Health Organization, which is basically run by the World Economic Forum. Anyway.
Right on, brother. All right, so I found where I was at. We're headed to Aquarius, obviously, tomorrow. I can't believe the day is here. Finally. Okay, so the themes of Aquarius fixed year is 11th house energy here, which is groups and friends and like-minded people with similar interests in achieving ideals and hopes. We have joint activities, group expression, social life, friends, and legacies. This is a totally different approach from 10th house Capricorn energies of we control, cardinal, earth. Aquarius's mantra is we know and is more concerned about mutuality, what the other knows, collaboration, coming together, forming large groups, what we have in common in the ways that we will not be controlled. Remember, this is huge. With Pluto and Aquarius, we now have to focus our attention on two other planets in their monkey business and what they're up to. And that would be Saturn and Uranus, because they both rule the modern day Aquarius. So Aquarius is altruistic, friendly, humanitarian, inventive, and individualistic, coming out to meet the collective. So it's people coming out in their own knowledge, coming out in their own strength after they went through that 10th house nightmare. I'm sure Pluto and Capricorn has not been easy. It just hasn't. I know it brought a lot of really, really good things, and we wouldn't be here without it. But for me, it was pretty brutal. It was a huge shift and change, and I'm finally landing and feel like I'm on some more stable ground with things. But I had a lot of change and transformation to do related to Capricorn themes because of my 10th house and how I left the financial industry when I woke up and, walked away. And that's all part. There was a mass exodus of people that left the financial systems and other big government positions when they began to read, like The Creature from Jekyll Island, for one, by Griffith. Great book. And things like this, and began to listen to people like Edward Snowden. Like, wait a minute. And, all of the other exposure that's come. So people have been leaving the financial system, and especially in my circles, they did. And I was one of them. So Aquarius is a logical sign, a perceptive sign, an inventive sign, a very intelligent sign. It's also rebellious and unique, can be unpredictable, and isn't afraid of change at all. The shock and awe planet belongs to Aquarius. And this is the tower, the lightning bolt coming from the sky, hitting the tower. That would be Uranian energy. I believe that's Mars, though. But that's Uranian energy. Whenever you see a lightning bolt, you have to think of Uranus. It's sudden shock and awe, and change, and shifting, and out of your control. Saturn is about then taking that energy and making it useful and making it practical and putting it in some type of a container so that we can all benefit. Where Saturn controlled Capricorn in the 10th, Saturn now takes a more constructive, amiable role as it morphs into that 11th house energy and says, no, I want to help the other with these new structures. I want to help the other with these new humanitarian efforts. I want to help see another's point of view by putting these structures together. So wherever Aquarius is within your chart will show where you march to the beat of a different drum for sure. And you're going to find your others and your greater group there. Super important to find out where, as Pluto goes into Aquarius, how this is going to impact your chart. And you can look at your natal chart, and then you can also look at your transits. And I'm happy to say I am taking clients. My business is back open, and it's under
Nice.
Star Point Consulting. I am available. I'll just put my information in the description if anybody's interested in getting a reading. And
Very nice.
okay,
Glad
so
to hear it.
yeah, thank you. Shock and awe, great change, great upheaval in humanitarian themes, others being taken care of, others being heard, others being accepted. And I just want to talk about this for a moment as I wrap up this portion and just go into the new moon in Aries quickly. There is a lot of new expressions of sexuality coming out in our world. Would you say?
Yes.
That's been part of that Capricornian, how do I put this? My way or the highway. It's all about me. And I'm not saying
Well, yeah.
Capricorns are all about themselves, but they're interested in manifesting on the
Also,
earth.
the
Go ahead.
Pluto in Capricorn. We talked about the corruption of the government because that leads to chemical pollution, and there's been lots of studies in chemical pollution interfering with hormones, sex hormones, things like that. The frogs aren't literally turning gay, but they were changing sexes.
Well, and what we're also understanding with all of the movement in the ninth house we've been seeing is a lot of this information from other cultures and other societies is also finally seeing the light of day, meaning it's not so as unacceptable to be bisexual or androgynous in other cultures. Now, is it the main flavor, so to speak? No, but the sexual identity isn't as focused as it is in like the West. There seems to be this, well, there is, a strong fixation on it's got to be this way that you express yourself. And if you come out of those lines, then you're wrong and you're shamed. And wow, I encourage everyone to watch Disclosure on Netflix. And there's probably ones that have been better well done, but I had to stop it and just weep because the fight that people have as transgenders or wanting to be function in a different way than their birth assigned gender, they have really gone through a lot, and we have completely bastardized these people, and there's no other way to say it, and I think it's changing whether I agree with it or not. There's too much evidence now, I think, that it has shown up. Now, shown up in other cultures and at other times. Again, we've got a lot of strong opinions on this. Like, this is a big deal. This is part of us going into the Aquarius energy of the other, saying, I may not agree with you and I may not even like it. Okay. But I will respect you as a human being. It's that simple. If you where we draw limits, and I do, is if you start harming someone in front of me that I love, or really a stranger, because we're all one. If you start harming someone that is innocent, then all bets are off, because I can in good conscience stand there and watch somebody harm somebody else. But if somebody wants to dress a certain way, I don't know, who am I to judge or change their lives so drastically as to have these operations? Who am I to judge? Listen, again, whether I agree with it or not, I sense that's irrelevant. Why do I have to grandstand? Some of these people, not me, but some people are grandstanding so far off in another direction, and they're mocking people and they're making money off of it. And I comment because I have a packed 11th house astrology chart in Virgo. I was born in 1963 with Pluto conjunct Uranus, and I'm going to have something to say about it. And I'm a Cancer stellium, so I stand up for the little guy. And I'm not going to mention names, but today I saw a short video of one of these right winger people. And hey, I'm conservative in some of my expressions. I don't have a problem with saying that, but I don't tell people they have to be like me and then get on a video and make money off of mocking them out and pulling the Bible and the white patriarch and the one God theme down upon me. It's sad to me. So I don't know why the podcast took this turn, but thanks for listening. I think that Pluto going into Aquarius is going to bring us into, here it is. We have to give space. We have to hold accountable all human beings. All human beings. But we have to make way for the change because it's coming. Just as we saw what Pluto did in Capricorn, and you can go back through the ages and you can read world history, that which isn't true. We don't know what's true or not true, but it appears to have taken place. And there's these themes show up around individuals who were ruling and reigning and in the public, and those that we know about, and cultures and the way people acted and the way people responded at that time. We see patterns that fit. So Pluto in Aquarius is huge, absolutely huge. I'm going to close there and just, encourage you to study that on your own because it's super, super exciting. With that, I'm going to go into the new moon in Aries super, super quick. Did you have anything while I'm flipping pages here you wanted to say on Aquarius, Pluto, and Aquarius?
No, you said it better than I ever could.
Okay. Well, thank you. Okay. So today at 2:10 and 32 seconds, PM, we experience the new moon in Aries. So when we have new moons, we have a shifting and a turning of the moon, of course, moving into its new fullness into another sign. And it's going to stay there until it becomes full, of course, and then it releases into the next sign. And we know the cycle. We've lived with the cycle. But new moons are for intentions and beginnings and fresh starts and placing something out that you've been working on, perhaps a project or a creative energy. So I'm excited to say that in our transit, it's all transiting that first house, like I said earlier. So it's pretty cool. We have a lot of doubling up of planets, a lot of conjunctions in that first house. So the first house, of course, is the ascendant. Not going to go into that really deep, but Aries runs the first house. Cardinal fire energy, where the physical body comes out into the world, the seed is born, the fire is started, and we're on our way in this world, the first house. And so this Aries energy and the new moon is asking us to go out in our projects, to be open to starting new things, to consider how we start new things. How is our Mars energy, which ties to Aries, the god of war, the energy that can just push, 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 and place things out on the earth. Where is Mars this evening? We have to look at this if we have an Aries new moon. Mars is sextiling this moon in Gemini at 28 degrees. So almost 29, it's 28 degrees and 41 minutes. So at a potent degrees here shortly as it moves, and it is conjunct Hecate at 0 degree Cancer. Okay. I came in with a 26-degree Hecate in Cancer. I came in with a 26-degree Cancer sun. My son came in first. She came after, I think, 9 minutes after I was born, in the same degree, same sign. So that it's in Cancer, that it's in a 0 degree, that I'm speaking with such passion this evening is why. She's in the house and she works with me, and the archetype is very familiar to me and its energy. I also have a strong Mars in my chart. My Mars is in the 11th house in my chart. It's not in Gemini, it's in Virgo. But in Gemini, this is the voice. This is air. This is teaching, speaking, communicating in a Marsanian way. So there's a lot of power to put out energy today. And everyone needs to be careful of that. This will, new moons last up to 2 weeks till we have our next change in the moon. So we're working with these energies. Just because we experiencing them doesn't mean they go away right away. They took time to come in and they take time to go out. So for the next good 9, 10, 2 weeks, days there, you have access to some potent, powerful energy in the way that your Gemini is in your own chart, in the way that you use mutable air energy, how you're speaking. And with Hecate there, for me, she's bringing a dignity. She's bringing a careful expression. She's bringing an expression that says be bold, but also be respectful, because not everyone is on the same page with the information you share. And so I hope that I'm doing that. And with that, I want to share that the moon is opposite the asteroid Ceres. And this is important to talk about. I want to read for a moment. We did a podcast on Ceres. All right. If you have not listened to our podcast on the main 4 asteroids, I encourage you to do that. We enjoyed making that, and Ceres was really, really fun to learn about, and she is a powerful asteroid. I'm not going to go into all of her background except to say that she's also known as Demeter, and she also was helped by Hecate as she went to go rescue her daughter Persephone from Hades himself. But check this out. She is sitting opposite the moon at 0 degrees of Libra, and she is retrograde. So Libra. Now we have Ceres, which is the nurturing, the relationship between agriculture, the earth, and the body, and the home, the relationship between mother and child, and nurturing, taking care of people, animals, plants, things, its growth, its herbs, its grains. Again, the podcast goes into more description, but she's deeply concerned about the things of the home during this new moon. She isn't in the home, but she's in the goddess herself. So Libra is ruled by Venus, which of course deals with our ways of relating. It deals with money. It deals with Taurus as well. And Venus is in the 10th house, which we just broke down. So Venus is concerned about 10th house themes, which of course would be what we do for a living, the government, which of course has to do with all of the operations of the government, which have to do with finances, has to do with the father. Juno sitting there with Venus, that's another partnership there in Taurus, another asteroid that's deeply concerned with partnering. So there's a need there at the same degree, 6 and 6, for them to work together in that area. The new moon's going to be highlighting this because it's bouncing off of that series in Libra. The other thing is she's over there 30, 60, 90. She's trining over there the Mars. So she's fired up about what she represents and finances, truly. And also, she has a lot of passion behind it, and it's opposite the moon. So there is probably some emotional energy tied, and it's very verbal. So that is on people's minds during this Aries new moon, and the new moon with Mercury there is going to be talking about, it's going to want to go out in this energy and fix it. It's going to want to, it's got the energy there to do what it needs to do. I haven't gone in to the rest of the chart, but we do have in the 6th house quickly Pluto at 29 degrees 59 minutes now, as it's at 2:10:32 p.m. in the afternoon, and we have Eros, the asteroid of the way that we love physically and very sexually, is in Capricorn as well, conjunct Pluto. So this would tell me that, and that's in the 6th house, there's some changes right now today in the way that people are expressing their sexual energy, and it's tying back to that 10th house. It's tying right back to that 10th house themes. So that's what's on the table. It's definitely not an easy new moon to handle, because with the the equinox, spring equinox, and the power behind a 15-degree moon and Aries being cardinal fire, it's a lot of power. And Jupiter is conjunct this moon, which has to be talked about, and just enlarging the great benefit, of course, enlarging all of the energy and the situations. So if anyone has been in some debates today, or you more likely quite possibly could, about such issues in the next 2 weeks or so, that's definitely on the table. That's the way I read it. And with that, I am going to hand it back over to you to open us up with the Kabbalah.
The Kabbalah, the word Kabbalah, comes from a Hebrew word meaning to receive, as it was exclusively an oral tradition for most of its existence. As to how long, it's debated. We're going to get to that. The backbone of this oral tradition was written down in 2 books, the Sefer Yetzirah and the Zohar, attributed to either Moses or Abraham, which cryptically explain the meanings of the 22 Hebrew letters and the numbers 1 through 10, which together form the 32 paths of the Tree of Life. The first instance of a diagram called the Kabbalistic Tree of Life was designed by Johann Reuchlin, Reuchlin, a German Catholic scholar in 1516. However, it only had 17 paths connecting the 10 spheres. The tree went through an evolution by various minds until 1652 we arrive at the modern Tree of Life, when Athanasius, Athanasius Kircher, a German Jesuit scholar, published his diagram of the Kabbalistic Tree of Life in Oedipus Egypticus, including 22 paths connecting the 10 spheres, assigning a Hebrew letter to each path, and astrological symbols. Here is a little bit more on the generals of the Kabbalah, in the very beautiful language of Eliphas Levi. The following is a section from his The Elements of the Kabbalah in 10 lessons, published in the book called The Kabbalah by Papus, which you can probably find published other places too. That's just where I found it. He says, the Kabbalah, or traditional science of the Hebrews, could be called the mathematics of human thought. It is the algebra of faith. It solves all the problems of the soul as if they were equations by isolating the unknowns. It gives to the ideas the clarity and rigorous exactitude of numbers. Its results are for the spirit infallibility, as if they were relative, however, to the sphere of human knowledge, and for the heart, profound peace. Magic, or the science of the Magi, had as representatives in antiquity the disciples and possibly the masters of Zoroaster. It is the knowledge of the secret and particular laws of nature which produce hidden forces, the magnet, both natural and artificial, which can exist outside the metallic domain. In short, and to use a modern expression, it is the science of universal magnetism. The Hermetic philosophy is the science of nature. In the hieroglyphs and symbols of the ancient world, it is the search for the principle of life together with the dream for those who have not yet succeeded of accomplishing the great work, the reproduction by man of natural and divine fire, which creates and regenerates beings. These, my dear sir, are the things which you wish to study. The scope is immense, but the principles are so simple that they are represented by and contained within the numbers and letters of the alphabet. It is a labor of Hercules which resembles a child's game, say the masters of the holy science. The qualifications necessary for success in the study are a great rectitude of judgment and a great independence of mind. One must do away with all prejudice and every preconceived idea. And it is for this reason that Christ said, ye must become as a little child, or ye cannot enter into Malkuth, that is the kingdom of knowledge. So what really inspires me about Kabbalah in this way is the application of a logical and scientific mind to areas of spirituality that is represented absolutely nowhere in modern culture. And it is the way of understanding divinity, the universe, and the self through understanding the basic archetypes, the numbers, letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the zodiac, meaning the 12 constellations, and the 7 planets. That's what he means by is as simple as a child's game, but still so immense. Because anyone can read a book on those archetypes, but marinating on them over time, seeing the connections between them, it's one thing to read about it in a book, but there's just something that can't be substituted, right? That's the difference between understanding and wisdom, right? You have the wisdom once you've read it in a book, but do you understand all the layers? It seems more simple on the surface, but the deeper you go, the more interconnected everything is, and it explains everything. Do you have anything to say before I move on to the Kabbalah being Egyptian?
You're associating its roots in the Jewish tradition from basically it was given to Moses, the law, the Torah, the 10 Commandments, and then handed down oral tradition from one master teacher to another. I think that needs to be talked about a little bit because that was quite fascinating to me, that whole aspect of it before you get into Egypt. Well, actually, no. Why don't you go into Egypt because it's then we'll come back around to that because I bring it up as well.
Now that's a good.
Go ahead.
It's a good spot to talk about the original transmission of knowledge, the way they would do it, and all the qualifications. If you have that info, I think that's a good place for it.
Yeah, okay, definitely. Yeah, I do, and I was fascinated by this. I spent a considerable amount of time trying to get back to the bottom of it, and man, I had myself in ephemerises, like, that went way back to the Bronze Age, trying to pull up Moses's chart, man.
Oh wow.
I got Moses' chart, I got
There's been
Abraham's
like
chart, and I'm
10 different calendars between now and then. Good luck.
yeah, but what was interesting is I was looking at the outer planets only, because I knew there was so much discrepancy on dates.
Mm.
But the outer planets, like Pluto, 20 years in Aquarius, I mean, we could see some of that. We could see some of the age that we were in, and things like that, and the way that communication was being brought out. But that's neither here nor there. That would have been too much of a rabbit hole to go into. But a couple things stood out to me, and one of them was the word Kabbalah actually, meaning being pronounced Ka-ba-la. And there's a reason for that pronunciation because the language is deeply integrated. The 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, the voices of God in creation, so to speak, are directly tied to the tree. So I thought that was really, really interesting. The other thing that stood out to me is the receiving, the way that it originated and came about, and that it was passed down from master to disciple, from teacher to pupil, and it was oral tradition. Tradition's a strong word, and it's tied everywhere you see the Jewish religion, so to speak, if you want to call it a religion. I think being Jewish is more of a way of life than a religion. You know, that's how I see my spirituality. It's more of a way of life than it is an actual label. It's who I am, not what I do. And who I am and my spirituality reflects out to what I do, so to speak. But the training to even begin to receive the mystical Kabbalah had to take place. Are you aware of that at all, of which I speak?
I heard that you had to be a rabbi for 20 years, married, and have children. Otherwise, you were not qualified to receive the Kabbalah.
Okay. Well, let me back up and just say this. Okay. I do want to say this. I want to say a word of thanks and share my gratitude for all of the masters and the mystics and the scribes and the rabbis and the holy men and women that came before me before this day, that I have had the privilege to sit here and just gather all your information from all the people who work so hard to put it out there. Thank you. I just want to say that because the
Agree.
information, yeah, the information is a huge preservation of work. And it's evolving too, right? It's changing, but we have enough of the original. We have enough that we know of, right? Until we keep digging, I guess. But we have enough that we know of this information that's been preserved reliably. And a lot of the the mystical Kabbalah is the Jewish text, but it was preserved by people who went before me. And so, I happened to come through the Kabbalah a back door. I came in through the Tarot, which fits on top of the Kabbalah, part of it. And and I came through the chakra systems when I began to go into holistic fields, and start working with Reiki and that whole training and all of that. Like I began to come into it. I wasn't raised the way that a young Jewish boy would be groomed and honed to receive this information. The other thing I want to say here is it was men predominantly that received this information. And I have a huge problem with that as a woman. I know that women received it. I know they were probably included in some of the meetings, but as far as the teaching of it and all that, I don't see any prominent women standing out. And I may be wrong, and I'd love to be shown where to look for that because I'd be very interested in reading her challenges, which they certainly would have been.
Well,
Because the more that you look, go ahead.
Jewish women maybe, but remember the book I quoted all the time on the Kabbalah, Dion Fortune. In the more modern
Yes.
period, there are some female Kabbalists, but according to in the Jewish tradition, yes, I don't think females were allowed. I'm not sure about that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, that's what I'm saying. Like now, and again, you're coming into this having the internet.
Right.
None of that was around back then, obviously. And so it was oral tradition. You met in secret, often at the peril of your own life. It went against a lot of the establishments that were on the outer edge of their lives. And so it's important to understand the cost of preserving this information. And for us to just sit here with charts and diagrams in the internet and just pull it up like it's um I think that we've been entrusted, if you're listening and you're learning about this, you feel drawn to it, like you're called to it, there's a reason for it. I think that there is a mystical, otherworldly attachment to this information. I felt that as I was going through it, did not feel alone. I felt like I was being guided. I felt like I was supposed to treat it with respect. I felt like it was a sacred type of information that I was understanding, and it had a high energy to it. And so I'm just grateful, and I do want to be a vessel that seeks to emanate the truths that are held within the Kabbalah in an authentic, integral, pure energy soul expression. I wrote that down. I mean, that is my desire. I have a packed ninth house stellum, like I was saying. And so I'm really drawn to understanding the higher levels of things and the deeper meanings and the deeper truths of this information that's not so popular down there in the third house of everyday life, so to speak.
I also very
Nope.
much share your appreciation for the spiritual scientists before us. I've been feeling that while researching recently. Especially when you get into the history, seeing how the Kabbalah has its origins in Egypt, and the attributions of the Hebrew letters to the paths on the tree of life do a really good job of exemplifying the gradual tweaks to this system that has and that is the way it has evolved over time, passed through the hands of some brilliant minds in modern times. And it is for anyone to use their critical thinking and analysis and knowledge of the archetypes to decide for themselves whether these tweaks make sense over time. But the arrangement of the 10 spheres and the 22 paths and the letters upon those paths and the cards associated with them, it is such a beautiful and finely tuned system that when you go into the history of it and what it used to look like, it makes it very obvious that we have been handed a finely tuned. I don't know why I keep going back to that phrase, but it is a brilliant, almost logical, but given the nature of this area, you can't call it logical, but it's bringing together the logical and the intuitive, which is how I think you get the most profound knowledge.
It is the intellectual and the intuitive, and they go into that as well in my studies of the history of the Kabbalah goes into that quite a bit. Something else that stands out was the serious tone, and I listened to quite a few rabbis. I saw the approach, the cautionary approach to the text, which needs to be talked about as well. But it bore levity, pardon me, within the Jewish communities, and the Kabbalah was approached with a measured plan and reverence, but some things had to take place before that was even, like, part of the plan. There had to be a maturity, and the mention of the age 40 and the number 40, having a firm grasp of all the other Jewish writings, which I talk about, and the cultural understanding, of who they were in light of the bigger picture and who they are in light of their community, the maturity, before proceeding due to the mind's state prior to the age of 40. And so the number 40 is said to be the age where one attains rectification or the third level known as neshama. You familiar with that? Relating to a
Yes.
place within the brain, also known as the seat of the mind. And it's said that animals do not have neshama. That this is the understanding that humans have the ability to use their brains and cognition to communicate, and that's not fully developed. You're like, well, of course he's been talking, but something takes place at that age. So they begin young. And then at 40, they're so advanced in human development that they're said to be ready to develop deep mystical knowledge. The idea here is that until the age of 40, one's life isn't settled, they're not matured, it's not deepened itself in extensive knowledge. The person is not fully emotionally and mentally intellectually strong.
It's also
So it's
very
interesting.
interesting you mention they don't have neshama until they're 40. Neshama is actually a part of the soul. So they're
Right.
saying like your soul isn't fully in your body until you're 40. That's a wild thought.
I, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if it was so much soul as much as it was really having a firm grasp on the
Uh,
prior study that one has to do
no,
before coming in.
there are three classifications of the in Kabbalah of the soul, and I'm blanking on the exact details. I haven't gone into it too much, but just like in modern Western times, we have the physical body and the spirit, which is half biological, half divine light, and then you have the soul, which is divine light. It's very similar, and I'm pretty sure neshama is the highest, the ankh, or we would call it the soul. Right. So it definitely is a part of the soul in Kabbalistic theology. I've been reading about that recently. So that is very interesting because I've often heard people say, well, not people, but certain cultures don't believe that a soul is fully in a child's body until they're like 10 or something, and that justified poor treatment of them. So it's kind of wild to hear the idea that there's still one part of your soul, your highest part, that hasn't fully settled in until you're 40. I mean, that's a wild idea because that seems like it's a bit late.
Yeah, that's what they believe. But see, it also has to do with, and I can't find it, but I wrote it down somewhere, but it's eluding me. It's not in my notes, and I don't know what happened to it. But there are other books. There's 4 other books that need to be read and studied before they even get to the mystical Kabbalah, and that takes their young adult lives to go through there. Nothing is rushed. Nothing. It's not like you can go in and pop in a YouTube video and you sit down with a sandwich and a beer and you're learning about the Kabbalah. Okay? This was handled with more of integrity and understanding the pure energy that it was and that it held, and that the teachings couldn't just be given to anybody. So that was really clear, that you were chosen to be given this information or born into a family that passes it on, that's being chosen to them. But you were to know this information. And so the passing on of it, all of it, was part of what they were trying to do by keeping this alive. And the prerequisite of the age and the prerequisite of all the learning and all the books that they need to have already studied, all of that was considered important. The biological mind at 40, it got me thinking, being the psychology person I am, thought, well, when we get older, the brain slows down, right? That's what I was thinking. And there's this rewiring that takes place within the brain. This is from bigthink.com/neuropsych/great-brain-rewiring-after- age 40. Older adults tend to show, I quote, less flexible thinking, such as forming new concepts and abstract thinking, lower response inhibition, as well as lower verbal and numeric reasoning, the reviewers noted. These executive function changes can be seen first in adults in their 5th decade of life, consistent with the findings of the systematic review that functional network connectivity changes and reaches their inflection point in the 4th and 5th decade. But it isn't all bad news. Tasks relying on predominantly automatic or well-practiced processes are less impacted by age and may even increase slightly across the lifespan, such as vocabulary and general knowledge. So why do these brain networking changes even occur in the first place? He goes on to talk to them, but as we get older, our bodies slow down and the brain becomes less efficient. So one thing is interesting, though, that the brain does go through a rewiring at the age of 40. It changes. It isn't, in the teen years, young adult years, the brain is firing off everywhere, right? It's learning, it's growing, it's building connections, it's figuring things out. The young brain is very, very, very active in parts that the older brain is not, as regarding levels of interconnectivity and reflecting the ability for specialized processes to occur. So it goes on to say that makes sense, as this is the time when we're learning how to play sports and speak languages and develop talents. Around our mid-40s, that's when the brain begins to change and become less connected. So there's something about the 40. There was also symbolically in the Bible a lot to do with the number 40. There were 40 days and 40 nights in the flood. There was 40 years of wandering in the desert for the Jews, so before they were allowed to enter the promised land. So again, it's said to be the age which one attains rectification of the 3rd level, known as Nashma. I'm sorry if I didn't pronounce that better. What also stood out to me regarding the Jewish perspective of 40 was that they knew the high vibrational energy behind the teachings, and that if one wasn't grounded, this is why it's important. By the time you're 40, think about it. A lot of the nonsense, for the most part, is out of your life. You're not there yet, you nonsense kind of guy. Just kidding. You're not there yet, but you will be. I'm turning 60 this year. So the majority of my nonsense, although I'm still a little, I'm a wild thing. I always will be, but the bigger, huger risks. I mean, I know where I'm at. I know what's up. I know how long we live. I get it. By 40, a lot of that is out the window. And then from 40 to 60, 70, you're really living, I think, who you are. Not to say that changes can't happen. They do. My awakening, out of the financial system was 12 years ago. When I wasn't 40. I was older than 40, but it was significant to me when it took place, and it was closer to 40 than it is to 60. So there's an emotional maturity, and I go in later and I'll hand it back to you, but if our minds aren't settled and our areas of life are confused, or you go into this information with a mind that's not really sound, it can really befuddle you and confuse you. And if you're in a depressive state or even maniac, it only intensifies the mania. So there was a cautiousness, like your brain needed to be at a certain space, headspace, in order for you to move forward. So I'll leave it at that to add the rest later, but I'll hand it back over to you. Were you going into Egypt now? Is that correct?
Yes, yes, it is. So I believe this passage says it best. The following passage is the foreword to a book called The Kabbalah by Gerard Encausse, I think is how you say it. Encausse. He also goes by Papus, Papus. This foreword to his book was written by W.N. Shores, Schors. Papus' opinion was that the Kabbalah was attributable to Moses, and biblical history was sufficient to prove to Papus that the Kabbalah was the most perfect summary of the Egyptian mysteries, and as such, via Gnostic, Rosicrucian, Masonic, and Martinistic ideas and fraternities, the keystone of all Western tradition. Though this point of view has sometimes been denied, it is to most occult authorities an established fact, as can be seen in the writings of the White Russian doctor and initiate Skariatin, who, under the pseudonym Enel, Enel, wrote his Lingua Sacra, not yet translated into English, which most convincingly confirms Papus' theories by tracing basic Kabbalistic problems back to the sacred Egyptian writings. Papus' opinions on the tarot, which he calls the oldest book of the world, can best be understood in relation to his belief in the Egyptian origin of the Kabbalah, as the 22 trump cards correspond with the 22 Hebrew letters of the alphabet, the origin of which can be traced back to Egyptian hieroglyphs. The tarot must also be of Egyptian origin. In this context, it becomes clear when Papus states, we can now understand why Pythagoras initiated into Egypt into the secrets of the holy word Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, replaced this word in his esoteric teachings by the sequel of the 4 first numbers of the Tetractys. It might be said here that the most occult authors consider Egypt to be the birthplace of the tarot, and that this reasoning is also consistent with their views on the origin of the Kabbalah. So when we say that the mysteries of the Kabbalah are the summary of the Egyptian mysteries, it's one thing to say it, but let's give an example. In the book Egyptian Mysteries by Lucie Lamie, I found a very brief passage mentioning the secret name of Ra. It is said that he who speaks it in its true pronunciation shall cease to be and attain ultimate wisdom. This is exactly the same as the Tetragrammaton in Kabbalistic philosophy, one of the centerpieces spoken of most by the Kabbalistic authors. A very quick summary of the Tetragrammaton is that it is the fourfold secret name of God, and one who pronounces it in its true pronunciation shall attain ultimate wisdom and cease to be. As the old proverb goes, no one can see the face of God and live. This fourfold name of God is spelled with the Hebrew letters Yod, He, Vav, and then a second He. These letters represent the concepts of the 4 elements, as do the 4 suits of the tarot, as well as the concepts of the active, passive, and equilibrium, which is identical to the astrological terms of cardinal, fixed, and mutable, and the alchemical terms sulfur, salt, and mercury. And here we're beginning to see how ancient Egypt, and as a result, the Kabbalah, has influenced all of Western occult tradition, from astrology to alchemy to the tarot. It is the cornerstone. See, Westerners look at India and see, oh, it's so magical with the Hindu sages, meditating in the mountains, and oh, the Taoist Chinese, so wise and very much the same wisdom. In the West, we have the Kabbalah. That is where our wisdom is, and this has been occulted. It has been kept in many secret societies, like was mentioned, the Rosicrucians, Masonic, Martinism. They are very similar in the idea that it is received secret knowledge only for the privileged few. And of course, that idea could have a negative impact, right? Because as we know, and not always the greatest people end up being in those secret societies, but that's a whole other tangent. Do you have anything to say before I move on to dating the Sefer Yetzirah?
Yeah, I know that the tarot has been tied back to Egypt. I didn't know that so just the Kabbalah, the mystical piece of it, is tied back to Egypt. Not all of the other forms of information that the Kabbalah is attached to for the Jewish people is not.
Well,
Which would be
the argument he's making is the lessons are one and the same.
well, this would be the book of the law, the Torah, that they have to read. So, like the mystical Kabbalah has nothing to do with the Torah. It's
Well, not
here it
nothing
is.
to do. It provides the mystical interpretation of it.
So you had to have by 40 had extensive knowledge in the Tanakh, Hebrew Bible, Midrash, the Jewish hermeneutic tradition, in Halakha, Jewish religious law, also known as the Torah, and then you were able to open the mysteries, and not until then. So this is why I'm asking. Like, this was another prerequisite, that the true knowledge of it all won't even be open to you until you do the other pieces and you're 40 and all these other requirements are met.
Says the Jewish tradition. I mean, no one has a monopoly on the knowledge. The point is the ultimate lessons, the highest lessons of the Kabbalah are the same as the highest lessons coming out of ancient Egypt, is the same as the highest lessons coming out of India and China and all over the world. Where you find mysticism, you find very much the same concepts at the highest level.
I agree. From the Jewish perspective, the mystical Kabbalah is Jewish in origin, down to the names of God on the tree of life. And like you just said, Yad, or is it Vad?
Yad He Vahe.
Hey Vad
The
Hey.
Tetragrammaton.
Yeah, that is Hebrew. Yeah.
Oh yeah, of course.
So
but
my question
the
is,
idea is those are their versions of expressing this lessons that came from Egypt.
okay. So they made their own system.
Yes, with the same concepts.
Okay. That's just mind blowing.
I mean, that's pretty much all of religion. I mean, when you go deep enough.
Yeah, I know it's true, but it's so, like, there's something to the 22, like how does it connect with Egyptian the way that it connects? Or they just make their own, like, is there Egyptian Kabbalah? Is that what you're telling me?
They don't call it that. I mean, how do I say it? Thinking too literally. It's more, you're thinking too literally and earthy and Virgo-y, and I'm saying more abstractly. The lessons, the morals, the metaphysics, the concepts. It's not that somehow, the Sefer Yetzirah goes back to an Egyptian guy. No, it's the Jewish retelling of knowledge that came from Egypt, is the idea.
Yeah, that helps. Okay, I understand. I just didn't know if, like, they also had the other 4 books that's required. All of this requirement in the way that the Jewish people do it.
You're thinking
all of
much
that
too
is
literally.
Their own deal. Yeah,
Yes.
It's just their own packaged. Here's the mystical Kabbalah. Here's how we do it. And then Egypt is a whole nother different expression. Sorry.
And what my goal with this, putting all these notes together, was after we connect the tarot back to Egypt, and you see how the ideas of the Kabbalah also go back to Egypt, they're all interconnected. It's all the same knowledge, is my whole point tonight.
Right. Agreed. Carry
So,
on.
dating the Sefer Yetzirah, one of the two books generally in the backbone of the Jewish tradition of the Kabbalah, the first manuscripts that we have were written around 800 to 1300 AD. So that's what academia has declared. That's when Kabbalah started. That's its origin. But of course, we know it's been an oral tradition for most of its existence. It was only written down. Actually, strike that. Anyway, it was only an oral tradition for most of its existence. And if we analyze the Sefer Yetzirah, there is an astrological clue as to its origination. So here is chapter 7 of the Sefer Yetzirah, translated by Papus. In the universe, the dragon is like a king on his throne, and the zodiac, the year, is like a king in his city. In man, the heart is like a king in battle. This is chapter 6, translated by S. Karp. In the universe, the dragon is like a king on his throne. In the year, the sphere is like a king in his city. In the person, the heart is like a king in his provinces. At first, it's unclear exactly what the dragon refers to, but we can tell that all the other metaphors are about a central motivating force. Now, due to the same wobble of the earth that causes the precession of the equinoxes that you probably know about, it also causes the pole stars to shift. The pole stars, of course, at the highest point in the sky that never move to our human eye, only very gradually over time. So for a very long period of time, it occupies the same point, never falling below the horizon. So the pole stars change over time. From 3500 BC to 2000 BC, the constellation Draco was occupying the pole region, the center of the sky, appearing to humans to never move. It is believed this is the dragon being referred to. And during 3500 to 2000 BC, ancient Egypt was flourishing, and this is the supposed time of Abraham, lending evidence to this knowledge being far older than 800 to 1300 AD.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was very interesting. Another example of academia being very, what's the correct word? Arrogant, being very dismissive. Anyway, as we're going to continue on, here is a little bit of the connection between tarot and the Kabbalah. Because my argument is they are all the same. This is an excerpt from the 6th lesson on the Kabbalah by Eliphas Levi. In the 22 figures of the tarot, Court de Llewellyn saw a representation of the Egyptian mysteries and attributed their invention to Hermes or Mercury Trismegistus, who also referred to as Thoth. So, who is this Anton Court de Llewellyn? His full name is, his birth name is Anton Court. He named himself Anton Court de Llewellyn. He lived from January 25th, 1725 to May 10th, 1784 as a former Protestant pastor born in France. Most of his work is in French, none in English, so for now we'll have to rely on Wikipedia's summary of his work. And it says, it was his immediate perception, the first time he saw the tarot deck, that it held the secrets of the Egyptians. Writing without the benefit of Champollion's deciphering of the Egyptian language, Court de Llewellyn developed a reconstruction of tarot history. Without producing any historical evidence, which we are about to give you, me and Kate personally, which was that Egyptian priests had distilled the ancient Book of Thoth into these images. And Just a quick aside, the ancient Book of Thoth was a book mentioned in Egyptian folk tales that would give one essentially omniscience and omnipotence. They brought to Rome, where they secretly known to the popes, who brought them to Avignon in the 14th century, whence they were introduced into France. An essay by the Comte de Mellet included in Court de Llewellyn's Monde Primitif is responsible for the mystical connection of the tarot's 21 trumps and the Fool with the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet. An essay appended to this gave suggestions for cartomancy. Within 2 years, the fortune teller known as Attila published a technique for reading the tarot, and the practice of tarot reading was born. So it's interesting
I'm very familiar with her.
That the tarot decks were around before tarot reading was. So most people wouldn't think to separate those two. So it was being used for its symbolism and magic before it was being used for fortune telling.
And what year was this?
I don't see what year Attila published her thing, but it stemmed from Court de Llewellyn, who lived between 1725 and 1784.
Yeah, that's who I was asking about. I knew Attila was more newer, more closer to us in the timeline of things. And he was from France.
Yes. I thought that was an interesting bit of history.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Yeah, absolutely.
So here's a little more connecting the tarot to Egypt. This is also from Eliphas Levi. It is certain that the hieroglyphs of the tarot can be found on ancient Egyptian monuments. It is also certain that these signs trace in synoptic groupings on stelae or metallic tables, such as the Isaac table of Bimbo, were reproduced separately on engraved stones or medallions, which later became amulets and talismans. Thus, the pages of the infinite book were separated into diverse combinations, assembled and transposed in ways forever new, furnishing and inexhaustible oracles of truth. I own one of these ancient talismans brought back from Egypt by one of my friends. It represents the binary of cycles, or more commonly, the two of coins. It is a symbolic expression of the great law of polarization and equilibrium, which produces harmony through the analogy of opposites. This is how this symbol appears in our present-day tarot. The metal itself is rather worn, about as wide as a silver 5-franc piece, but thicker. The two cyclic polarities are shown exactly as they are in the Italian tarot, a lotus blossom with an aureole or nimbus. The astral current, which both separates and attracts the two poles, is represented on the Egyptian talisman by the goat of Mendes placed between the two vipers, comparable with the serpents of the caduceus. On the reverse side of the medallion, an adept or Egyptian priest replacing Mendes between the two poles of the universal equilibrium leads a goat down a tree-lined avenue, the animal becoming more docile, ordinary beasts beneath the wand of man, the imitator of God. The 10 numerical signs and 22 letters of the alphabet and 4 astronomical signs are the seasons of the summary of all Kabbalah. 22 letters and 10 numbers of the pass of the Sefer Yetzirah. 4 gives the Merkava and the Shemem Farash. It is as simple as a child's game and complex as the most arduous problem of pure mathematics. So, that's fascinating. He has a talisman. Well, he's dead now. He had a talisman from ancient Egypt that shows exactly what the two of discs on the Italian tarot. That's amazing.
Right. I agree. That's fascinating.
That was shocking.
And that is, is that actually, is there a picture of that, or has that been?
No, this book was published in about 1850, so there was no picture.
19th century. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, there wouldn't have been. There might have been an embossed engraving of it, though. They were doing that, and metalwork, and might have been artistry or tapestry. That's how they express these things that were in their lives was through written form
Yeah.
and artistry.
Right. They didn't have cards back then. I mean, even now for
No.
a modern person to produce a deck of printed cards, I mean, that's not something just anyone can do. So they had medallions, carved metal and rock, what they could get their hands on. So I just
Okay.
have
Yeah.
a little
Yeah.
bit
Go ahead.
on the connection between the Kabbalah and the Tarot. I just thought it was fascinating. I was able to find the evolutionary line of occultists who arranged the Hebrew letters onto the 22 paths of the Tree of Life. So it started with Guillaume Postel. He lived between 1510 and 1581, and all of his work is in Latin. Van Helmont Fils, who was after him, all of his work is in French. Claude de Saint Martin Favre de Olivet, after them, all of their work is in French. And then finally, in the 1850s, we have Eliphas Levi, who we've been quoting beautifully tonight. I just thought those names were definitely worth mentioning. If you can translate French or Latin and you're interested in this stuff, that's an easy book right there. Translating some of their work, if you can, I've looked it up. You can get Guillaume Postel's Latin books on Amazon. The French and Latin versions are out there, just waiting to be translated into English. The last thing I just wanted to mention, the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 22 major arcana cards, they do represent the 12 zodiac signs, the 7 planets, and the 3 mother elements, fire, water, and air. And if I promise you, if you study the 22 major arcana, if you study the planets, the zodiac signs, the elements, and if you study the Hebrew letters, you will see the correspondences. They are not different. My last thing to say is go see it for yourself.
Yeah, I'm super excited to break down the Tree of Life on our next podcast and get into that. This one's gone almost 2 hours, with
Yep.
by the time we put it all together, we'll be doing some editing. But yeah, no, I have some things to share, but it's more going back to, for just a moment. Okay, going back to the caution when pulling up the Kabbalah and looking at it, because we're going to go deeper into it our next podcast. But even as you're looking to go into it, there was an analogy made that I thought was powerful. And I believe it was from and I'm going to cite everything in our details of we got our information. So he talks about, again, Rabbi, approaching the text, the mystical Kabbalah, with reverence. And he uses the sun as an analogy, and he says the sun is beautiful. It keeps us alive. I'm paraphrasing. Helps us to grow food, provides vitamin D. The sun increases our serotonin levels in the brain. It helps us to better handle what's known as SAD, seasonal affective disorder. And sun exposure can also help people with anxiety and depression, especially in combination with other treatments. But if we stare too long at the sun, we could damage ourselves. If we spend too much time out in the sun, we can damage ourselves. And he likens the sun to the Kabbalah in that it's high energy, it's pure truth, it's truth that has been hidden in secret for a reason. And all the rabbis talk about this. Like, they know that it's a mystical secret text. They get all the 4 other required books and law and things they need to know in the age 40 and all the other things that they do. But they show a caution when they start going into this portion. Person needs to be settled. So just a word of caution, go in with this information in a grounded place. Before we began our call, we did breath work. I burned sage. We cleared our spaces, called forth our guides, yada, yada. And I think that's important. I want to reiterate that because I know it's the age where you can pull up anything in seconds, but we're so busy seeing things with that practical eye, that an intellectual eye, that sometimes we don't bring in the intuitive nature. We lead with it because that's how we've been taught on this planet. I would say that's definitely been Capricorn and Pluto, no doubt. But things are changing and shifting, and energies are coming in calling on us to go out. In order for us to go out, we've had to have gone in. And in order to go in, we have to go in with the right frame of mind and having our senses about us. This is high mystical energy. And I think that there's something to be said about centering and balancing your own space before you go into this. And so there's this, because it's everywhere, there can be this triviality, and negligence of that fact. Now, I'm not saying I'm the voice on that. I'm saying many, many people have said this prior to it coming into my hands. And I sensed that when I was working with it and sitting down and studying it. So yeah, what do you think of that? And then we'll close out
I
here.
think it's very well said, a very great metaphor. And I would like to reiterate, ego is the biggest enemy of the magician. It's very, very easy to think highly of yourself when you're studying the secrets of the universe. So try and do your best not to fall into that trap. Clearly, I have. Right.
Yeah.
I'm doing
And
my
I have
best.
too. And yeah. And I'm adjusting that like I know you are. And if you read in our About Us description on YouTube there, we talk about this a little bit where we just want to bring the information out, and we have a right to our own opinions of how we view it, but we're not casting that on you. We're not saying this is the way it is, and if you don't follow it, go this way or get out of here. I don't feel that way at all. I invite other people's voices. I invite the challenge. I invite you expanding in my mind. Anthony has opened my mind up to things that I wouldn't have considered, allowed me to see things in a different light. And it's started off as us not agreeing on a point, but he's at times persuaded me, and I think I've opened his mindset up into different ways of viewing things too. So you see, that's what it's about. Not that we all agree, because we never will, but that I think it goes back to the way we conduct ourselves, which goes back to ego. And I've certainly learned my lessons there, my God. So I'm just going to say on the air right now, because I just feel it's a very spiritual, mystical call, that anyone that I have ever harmed, hurt in any way, hey, please forgive me. My heart and my passion is to be a vessel that is of light and dark, and to help you wade through the contrasts with my own life as an example. And so, yeah, so mote it be.
Well said.
All
Well
right.
said.
Well, I guess that's all we got. Until part 2, the tree, we break it down. The tree of life.
Good
Good night.
night.